November 1898. Wilmington, North Carolina. A legally elected city government was driven out at gunpoint. A black newspaper was burned, and the men who did it were never punished. I had worked plenty of dead files. This one smelled alive. Wilmington had been the largest city in North Carolina, a port town with tar on the docks, salt in the air, and money moving through cotton and lumber. Black citizens made up most of the population. For a few brief years, power had slipped beyond the old hands. The government they targeted was called Fusion. Republicans and populists had joined up. Black voters gave the coalition its spine. They won offices across the state, including Wilmington. On paper, it was ordinary politics. In the street, it was treated like theft. Alexander Manley ran the Daily Record, a black-owned newspaper on 7th Street. He wrote sharply and signed his name. In August of 1898, he answered a white supremacist speech about black men and white women. The reply was measured on the page. In Wilmington, it landed like a match. Alfred Moore Waddell stood waiting in the wings. Former congressman, orator, white supremacist organizer. He told crowds that if ballots failed, men should do the work with guns. The line was public. It stayed in the papers. Nobody misunderstood it. North Carolina had been tightening for years. Reconstruction had cracked, then curled inward. White Democrats wanted the state back entirely. Newspapers printed race panic like daily weather. Red shirts rode in columns, armed and visible, making politics feel like occupation before any office changed hands. Election season in 1898 came hard and close. Democratic speakers toured the state with torches, rifles, and open threats. Black communities heard the boots before the speeches. Voting still happened, but fear had already entered the room and taken a chair near the door. Wilmington mattered because it disproved a story white elites needed. A majority black city with black professionals, black office holders, and interracial government stood there, in brick and payroll records. That fact alone had become evidence against itself. The city had to be corrected. On November 8th, Democrats won statewide. Wilmington's local government, elected earlier, still stood. The next morning, white leaders gathered at the courthouse and drafted the White Declaration of Independence. The title was theatrical. The demands were plain. Manley must leave, black political power must end. A committee of armed white men marched to the Daily Record office. They found Manley gone. He had slipped out of town in the dark. The building remained. They smashed the presses, set the place ablaze,
and watched flames climb through the windows, while a crowd held the street. Then the shooting spread. Witnesses described black residents running, hiding, falling in alleys and near the riverfront. The number of dead never settled cleanly. Some records said fewer than 20. Later accounts ran much higher. The smoke covered more than one building. Men with Winchester rifles and revolvers moved through Brooklyn, the black neighborhood north of downtown.
Streetcars halted. Families barricaded doors. Others fled into swamps and pine woods outside the city. Investigators later found fragments. A full body count never came together. Too many names went missing early. At City Hall, Waddell and his allies forced the mayor, the board of aldermen, and the police chief to resign. It happened in daylight. Armed pressure did the talking. New officials were installed immediately. There was no pause between overthrow and replacement. The press outside Wilmington helped with the cleanup. Some papers called it a race riot, as if the violence had risen from nowhere and broken evenly over both sides. The wording mattered. Riot suggested chaos. Coup suggested authorship. The men holding rifles preferred the first word. The official record hardened fast. White leaders claimed they had restored order after dangerous black disorder. Federal intervention never came. Waddell became mayor. The seizure of power moved from crime into administration with the scratch of a pen. Reports from the time treated expulsions as practical housekeeping. Black leaders and white fusion allies were told to leave or be killed. Some were marched to trains under guard. Others vanished from directories and property rolls. The city grew quieter on paper before it grew quiet in fact. No grand prosecution followed. No sweeping inquiry. The dead were folded into rumor, clipped into editorials, or omitted entirely. The coup's architects walked into office and business meetings. Their version entered textbooks and commemorations. Official memory smelled clean because the blood had been scrubbed from the floorboards.
Public language stayed disciplined. Wilmington had experienced unrest. Wilmington had regained stability. Those phrases appeared in civic histories with the calm tone of bookkeeping. A government had been destroyed. The archive learned to say it softly enough that many people never heard it. The cracks started with the speeches. Waddell had said beforehand that white men would choke the Cape Fear River with carcasses if necessary. Other leaders printed threats just as direct. That mattered. Spontaneous riots did not usually arrive with
committees, manifestos, and prepared replacements. Then there was the timing. Democrats had already taken the state election on November 8th. If this had been panic over losing power, the calendar made little sense. Wilmington's local fusion government remained because city offices ran on a different schedule. The target was specific. It had names and desks. The death toll kept shifting under the light. Contemporary white newspapers minimized it. Black memory and later investigators described dozens, perhaps far more. Bodies near the river, men shot in the back, families scattered into marshland. Low numbers served the same purpose as the word riot. Another crack sat in the silence around Manley. His editorial became the excuse repeated in speeches, pamphlets, and resolutions. Yet the campaign against black political power had been organized long before August. The article was useful tinder. The woodpile had already been stacked high and dry. One theory held that Wilmington was less an isolated eruption than a field test for statewide disfranchisement. 2 years later, North Carolina amended its constitution with poll taxes and literacy clauses designed to gut black voting. The coup looked in that light
like demonstration and warning delivered together. Another line of inquiry followed business interests. Wilmington's port, contracts, and municipal jobs all sat inside the struggle. Removing fusion control did more than soothe racial panic. It handed payroll, policing, and patronage back to white Democrats and the commercial class tied to them. Some historians pushed further. They argued the coup had succeeded because local violence aligned with state strategy and national indifference. Reconstruction was already being buried across the South. Wilmington offered no mystery to officials who preferred not to see. A visible crime survived because it fit the season. I kept coming back to the newspapers. White papers amplified lies about black men,
black office holders, black competence. The Daily Record answered once and was burned for it. Destroy the press, scatter witnesses, rename the event. After that, a false memory could walk around in daylight. What came after was measurable. Wilmington's black middle class was broken. Property changed hands. Political participation collapsed. The city that entered the 20th century was whiter in power, quieter in the record, and missing many of the people who had helped build it. The absences had addresses. Some families never recovered names of the dead. Others passed down fragments at kitchen tables, away from schools and courthouse plaques. Oral history held what official history refused. A gunshot near Front Street, a man taken to the train, a child walking through ash where a newspaper office stood. The state eventually acknowledged the coup generations later. A commission studied it. Memorials appeared. Textbooks shifted. None of that restored office holders forced out under threat or citizens killed without count. Recognition came late and careful, the way institutions handled old fire after the smoke had settled. I closed the folder near dawn. Tar, smoke, ink, river mud. That was what the case left in my head. A coup happened in the open, then hid inside language for a century. So tell me, which detail doesn't sit right with you?